The smell hit him first. Copper and antiseptic and something underneath it, something sweet and wrong, like fruit gone soft in a hot car. Dale Kowalski woke up strapped to a table that was too cold for skin, in a room lit the color of an old bruise, and the first thing he registered before the restraints, before the three shapes standing over him, was that smell. "Subject is conscious," one of the shapes said, in a voice that clicked and hissed at the edges of the words like a radio catching two stations at once. "Proceed with extraction." Dale's wrists were pinned by bands of something that wasn't metal and wasn't quite plastic. He tested them once, felt them tighten in response, and stopped. Whatever this was, it had reflexes. His mouth was dry enough that his tongue stuck to his teeth when he tried to talk. "Extraction of what?" he managed. Nobody answered him. A needle the width of a pencil lead came down out of the dark above his head, guided by something with too many joints in its arm, and found the inside of his elbow with a precision that would have impressed the phlebotomists back at County General, if County General still existed, if Earth still existed in any shape he'd recognize. He didn't know. He'd been in a supply convoy 3 weeks ago, hauling coolant filters between forward bases, and then there'd been light and heat, and now there was this. He was 38 years old. He had a bad knee from a warehouse accident a decade back, a tattoo of his daughter's name on his left forearm that had gone slightly blue and blurred with age, and grease under his fingernails that 4 days of alien captivity hadn't managed to get out. He was not a soldier. He wasn't even good crew, the kind of guy units kept around because somebody had to keep the machines running, and Dale Kowalski, whatever else he was, could always keep the machines running. The needle drew dark blood into a vial. One of the shapes lifted it to what Dale guessed was a face, though it was hard to be sure in this light, and studied it the way you'd study a bug you found in your soup. "Defective," the shape said, discussed flattening the clicks in its voice into something almost bored. "As with the others, this species produces nothing usable." They put him back in a cell after that, if you could call it a cell, a cube of the same dim purple light with no visible door, no visible wall, just a boundary he found by walking into it face first the first hour he was there. He sat with his back against the invisible barrier and pressed the heel of his hand against his elbow where the needle had gone in, and he thought about Emma, 9 years old, staying with her aunt in Tacoma while Dale did 2 tours worth of hazard pay to catch up on the mortgage. He thought about the particular way she laughed with her whole body, like the laugh was too big to fit inside her, and he made himself a promise that had no realistic path to being kept. He was going to see that laugh again. The alien who'd called his blood defective came back 6 hours later. Dale was starting to be able to tell time by the light cycle, or thought he could, though for all he knew it was theater put on for his benefit. This one stood close to 9 feet if it stood at all straight, which it mostly didn't. Its spine had a forward curve that put its head roughly level with a tall human's, a design that made it look perpetually like it was about to strike something. Its skin, if skin was the word, had the sheen of wet slate, plated in overlapping segments across the chest and shoulders that shifted audibly when it moved, a sound like a knuckle cracking in slow motion. 4 eyes, arranged in a diamond, none of them blinking in sync. "You are conscious again," it said. "No contraction, no warmth. This is inconvenient. Your body does not process the sedative as calculated." "Sorry to inconvenience you," Dale said. The alien's head tilted, all 4 eyes narrowing at once in what might have been the beginning of curiosity or might have been nothing at all. "Sarcasm. Your kind does this even while restrained. It is an unproductive trait." "It's the only trait I've got left," Dale said. "You took my knee brace. Least you could do is let me keep the attitude." "I am Voskferi," the alien said, apparently deciding not to engage further with that. "Third surgeon of the Cathari Compact Medical Corps. You are Subject 41. Your blood is being catalogued for the Archive of Failed Species, and then you will be terminated as biological waste, as is standard procedure for specimens without medical value." It said all of this with the same flat clicking cadence it would have used to read out a grocery list. I inform you of this not from mercy. Our protocols require that specimens be told the outcome of testing before disposal. It reduces cortisol contamination of the tissue. Dale sat with that for a second. You're telling me I'm dying so my meat tastes better. An imprecise summary, B. Not incorrect. Great, Dale said. Good talk. He didn't sleep, not really, not in a cell with no dark to sleep in. He listened instead. Through the wall that wasn't a wall he could hear other cells, other prisoners, some human, judging by the cadence of the muttering, some clearly not, clicks and low moans in registers his ear couldn't place. Twice he heard something dragged past, heavy, and both times the sound stopped outside his cell just long enough that his heart tried to climb up through his throat before it kept moving. On what he guessed was the second day, a different alien came for him, smaller than Vosk Ferri, built leaner, with plating that ran more gray than slate and eyes that tracked independently instead of in pairs. It didn't announce a name. It didn't announce anything. It simply reached through the boundary of the cell, which apparently worked differently for them, took him by the back of the neck with a grip that could have popped his skull like a grape, and half dragged him down a corridor lit the same funeral purple as everywhere else. They put him in a room with equipment he half recognized and half didn't. Centrifuges that hummed at a pitch too low to be comfortable, tanks of fluid in which things floated that he made himself stop looking at, and in the center, a chair with restraints built into the armrests that had clearly seen more traffic than the one he'd woken up on. Vosk Ferri was already there, along with two others. One of them, taller even than Vosk Ferri, its plating a near black that seemed to eat the light around it, spoke first, and its voice had none of the flat clinical boredom of the surgeon. It had contempt, precise and unhurried, the way a man might speak about a stain he'd already decided wasn't coming out. This is the specimen. Its four eyes swept over Dale the way you'd look over a used car with a bad transmission. Frail, small musculature relative to skeletal frame. Note the asymmetric wear pattern on the left leg, structural failure already in progress before capture. This is what the humans send to war. He is not military grade, Vosk Ferri said. Logistics designation per the translated tags. Worse, the black-plated one said. They send their weak to die shoveling coal for the strong, and they call this a civilization. It turned those four eyes fully on Dale now. You understand nothing I say, I assume. I understand plenty, Dale said. You're a real charmer. Your mother teach you that, or is it just a Tuesday thing? The room went very quiet. Vosk Ferri's head tilt again, faster this time. The black-plated one, Dale would later learn its designation was Threl Nu, adjudicator of the Second Fleet, and that it did not enjoy being addressed in any register but formal, took one long, deliberate step forward, plating shifting with that knuckle-crack sound. It has language capacity, Threl Nu said, and there was something new under the contempt now, something Dale didn't like the taste of. Good. Then it will understand its purpose. The purpose, as it turned out, was a wager. Dale learned the shape of it over the following hour, delivered in the clipped, contraction-less speech that made every sentence sound like a verdict already handed down. The Cathari Compact was not strictly at war with Earth. It was harvesting it, testing species biology for compounds and traits of value, the way a prospector tests dirt for gold, and discarding what didn't pan out. Human blood, human tissue, human everything had so far tested as, in Threl Nu's word, unremarkable. No exotic enzymes, no exceptional regenerative capacity, no genetic markers worth the trouble of cataloging. But there was a dispute. Vosk Ferri, apparently, had filed a minority medical opinion, logged, cited, and thoroughly ignored, suggesting the testing protocols were flawed, that human thermoregulation and endurance metrics fell outside baseline parameters in ways the automated assays weren't built to catch. Threl Nu, ranking officer and a career skeptic of anything that smelled like sympathy for a subject species, had proposed a resolution that Dale gathered was less about science and more about ego. A live trial. A single combat of sorts. Not human versus Cathari in the sense of a duel. The Cathari were not so crude, Threlnu insisted, several times, with the specific irritation of someone who'd been accused of exactly that, but a survival trial. Subject 41, alone, against the environment of the long corridor, an outdoor testing range on the compound surface, pursued by a Cathari tracker-class hunter whose job was simply to run him down. If the specimen survives 12 of your hours, Threlnu said, Surgeon Voskferai's protocol revision will be authorized and the species will be studied properly instead of discarded. If it does not, a pause, unhurried, cruel in its patience, then the matter is settled, the specimen archive is closed, and 11th. I'll send more of your kind currently in holding will be processed as waste on the standard schedule instead of the extended one. 11,000. Dale had assumed, in the vague way a man assumes things he can't bear to examine closely, that he was more or less alone out here. Learning there were 11,000 more Emmas and Dales, and whoever else stacked up somewhere in this compound's holding, waiting on a number they didn't know they were attached to, did something to the inside of his chest that felt like a fist closing. And if I say no, Dale said. You will not be asked again, Threlnu said. You will simply be terminated and the standard schedule will proceed regardless. Your participation changes only the timeline for the others. Whether you accept is, biologically speaking, irrelevant to your own outcome. There it was, no door out, just a choice about who else's clock kept ticking. Fine, Dale said. His voice came out steadier than he expected. 12 hours, where do I sign? Something crossed Voskferai's 4 eyes that Dale, if pressed, might have called surprise. They didn't let him rest before it started, of course they didn't, but they did, grudgingly, in what Dale suspected was Voskferai's doing. Let him keep his own boots and give him a strip of gray fabric that functioned like a shirt, plus a single flask of water with a measured seal on it. Calibrated, Voskferai explained without inflection, to standard human hydration requirements for the trial duration, as though that phrase wasn't doing an enormous amount of quiet work. The long corridor turned out to be less a corridor than a wound cut into an alien landscape. A rift valley maybe 8 miles long, walled on both sides by cliffs of black rock that radiated heat like a cast-iron skillet left on a burner, the whole thing lit by a sun that sat low and orange, and mean in a sky the color of old rust. The air was thin and dry enough that Dale's first full breath of it made his throat feel sandpapered. The hunter is called Draveth, Voskferai told him at the edge of the corridor in what might have been the closest thing to a briefing Dale was going to get. Tracker class. It does not use projectile weapons in this trial, Threlnu's condition, to ensure the contest is, in its words, honest. It relies on physical pursuit and close engagement. It is faster than you across short distances. It is stronger than you in every configuration. It does not tire in the way you tire. A pause, 4 eyes fixed on him with an intensity Dale hadn't seen from it before. I am telling you this not to discourage you. I am telling you because my professional reputation depends on your survival, and I would prefer you understood the parameters rather than discover them by dying. Real warm bedside manner you got, Dale said. I am a surgeon, not a counselor. Yeah, I noticed. Dale looked down the length of the corridor, heat shimmering up off black rock, no shade anywhere he could see. 12 hours. Correct. Any tips, Doc? Anything in that protocol revision of yours that might actually help me not die? Voskferai's head tilted, considering, in that way that Dale was starting to recognize as the alien equivalent of choosing words carefully. Your species regulates body heat through a mechanism ours lacks entirely. You should not consider that irrelevant. And then, before Dale could ask what the hell that meant, a horn sounded somewhere behind the cliffs, a low, groaning note that vibrated in his back teeth. and Voskferi stepped back through a shimmer in the air that Dale hadn't clocked as a doorway until it closed. He was alone in the long corridor. Somewhere behind him, something that wanted him dead started to move. The first hour was running, plain and simple, and Dale, mechanic's knees, warehouse accident hip, 38 years old and out of practice at anything more athletic than climbing a ladder, was not built for it. He found that out fast, lungs burning in the thin, dry air, boots sliding on loose shale, the sun sitting on the back of his neck like a hand pressing down. Behind him, at a distance he couldn't afford to look back and measure, he could hear Draveth, a rhythm of footfalls too even to be anything but inhuman, unhurried, patient, the gait of something that had never once in its life needed to sprint because everything it hunted eventually just stopped. By the second hour his legs had gone past burning into a kind of numb static, and that was when he first saw the hunter properly, cresting a rise behind him, catching the orange light. Draveth stood taller than Threlnu, built long rather than broad, its plating a mottled ochre that matched the rock so well Dale understood immediately why he hadn't spotted it before. 4 limbs on the ground, 2 more folded along its back that looked less like arms and more like something built for climbing sheer rock. It didn't roar, it didn't do anything so cinematic, Imply looked at him across 400 yards of shimmering heat, and then it started closing the distance at a lope that ate ground twice as fast as Dale's exhausted, stumbling run. And Dale understood with total clarity that this thing was not tired, was not going to get tired, and that outrunning it in any straight line was not a plan. It was a wish. He cut sideways into a fold of the rock instead, scraping his forearm bloody on black stone that was hot enough to feel through his shirt sleeve, and put a boulder the size of a delivery van between himself and the hunter's line of sight. His chest heaved. His pulse hammered so hard he could feel it behind his eyes. And underneath the fabric of his shirt, running down his spine, soaking into the waistband of his pants, he was sweating, pouring sweat, the kind that used to embarrass him at construction sites back home. The kind Emma used to tease him about after he mowed the lawn, sweat evaporating off his skin fast in that dry heat and pulling the worst of the temperature down with it. He thought of what Voskferi had said. Your species regulates body heat through a mechanism ours lacks entirely. He didn't have a plan yet, but he had a fact, and out here a fact was worth more than a gun. He ran the third hour smarter than the first 2, conserving where he could, cutting through shade wherever the rock offered any, sipping the flask in small mouthfuls instead of the desperate gulps his body wanted. Draveth caught him twice in that stretch, once with a swipe of one foreclaw that opened a line across Dale's shoulder, blade deep enough that he felt the air on muscle before the pain even arrived, and once with a full-body tackle that put him on the ground hard enough to crack something in his ribs, a white flash of pain that made him black out for a half-second standing up. Both times the hunter let him go. That was the part that scared him most, more than the claws, more than the ribs grinding when he breathed. Draveth wasn't finishing him. It was testing weight, testing give, cataloging him the way Voskferi had cataloged his blood, assessing, patient, in no hurry at all, because it had 11 more hours and Dale had a body that was already starting to fail. By hour 5, the sun hadn't moved as much as it should have, the alien day ran long, he realized with a sick lurch, longer than 12 of his hours by a comfortable margin, which meant this whole ordeal was going to happen entirely under that low orange furnace with no cooling dark to hide in. His shirt was soaked through. His lips had cracked. The flask was 2/3 empty, and he made himself stop drinking from it even though his whole body screamed for more. He found the wash, a dry stream bed cut through the rock, walls close enough on either side that a big body couldn't easily flank through it, and he followed it because it was the only cover in miles. And that decision, made out of desperation more than strategy, put an idea in his head that he turned over while he ran, turning it the way he used to turn over an engine problem back home. Not what's wrong, but what's actually happening here mechanically, physically, and what can I do to it? Draveth didn't sweat. Couldn't probably, its plating didn't look built for it, and every time Dale had glimpsed it moving flat out in the heat, its long tongue had been out, panting, the way a dog cools itself, evaporating moisture off a wet surface to shed heat. That worked fine in short bursts. It was a much worse system than skin sweating across the whole body, when you actually needed to shed a lot of heat over a long, sustained chase. Dale had grown up hunting with his uncle in the Ozarks in July, and his uncle liked to say the same thing every single trip: dogs and heat don't mix past noon. You want to lose a hound, you don't outrun it. You outlast it. Persistence hunting. Some of the oldest humans on Earth had brought down animals twice their speed, and 4 times their strength with nothing but 2 legs, and the ability to sweat while the animal panted, chasing it through the hottest part of the day until its internal temperature cooked its own muscles from the inside, and it just stopped. Dale didn't need to outrun Draveth. He needed to outlast it, in the one part of this planet's punishing environment that was actively, mechanically, on Dale's side. He spent the 6th and 7th hours doing something that felt insane in the moment and only made sense in retrospect. He stopped hiding, and he started running Draveth in circles. Not literal circles, long loping traverses across open ground under the worst of the orange sun, forcing the hunter to match his pace across terrain with no shade, no relief, nothing but heat radiating up off black rock from below and down from that furnace sky above. Every time Draveth closed the gap, Dale cut hard, forced another burst of speed out of the thing, then ducked into whatever cover he could find to steal. 30 seconds of rest while his own sweat did its slow, quiet, unglamorous work. He got caught again in the 7th hour, a glancing blow from a forklaw across his hip that put him down and dragged a line of torn muscle he'd feel every step for the rest of the trial. And he crawled the next quarter-mile on scraped palms and one working leg before he could stand again, breath sobbing in his throat, blood running down into his boot. But Draveth's tongue was out further now. Its stride had lost some of that metronome evenness. Small things. Things a hunter that had never had to run down prey for 6 straight hours under a sun like this might not even have a name for yet, because in 11,000 years of Cathari biology, it had never needed one. By the 8th hour, Dale's body was a catalog of damage. 2 ribs he was fairly sure were cracked, a gash on his shoulder blade that had stopped bleeding only because it had nothing left to bleed with, the torn muscle in his hip screaming with every stride, his lips split and bleeding into the dust on his teeth, his vision swimming at the edges in a way that scared him more than any of the physical pain, because that was the dehydration talking. That was his body's own warning system. And he had maybe 4 ounces of water left in a flask that had never been meant to cover 12 hours in this heat. He found a shelf of rock jutting over the wash, just enough overhang to throw a slab of shade, and he pressed himself into it and watched Draveth's silhouette cast long and wrong-angled across the valley floor, still hunting, still coming, but slower now, visibly slower, its long tongue lolling, its gait developing a hitch it hadn't had in hour one. He allowed himself 30 seconds to think about Emma. Just 30 seconds, because more than that and he wasn't sure he'd get back up. Then he got back up. The turning point when it came wasn't a speech. It wasn't anything Dale planned. In the 9th hour, exhausted past the point where fear meant anything useful anymore, he misjudged a gap between 2 slabs of rock and went down hard onto his already cracked ribs, and the pain was bad enough that, for a few seconds, the world went white and distant, and he genuinely believed, with a strange calm, that this was where it ended. He heard Draveth's footfalls closing, not the metronome rhythm of the first hour, but something ragged now, stumbling, a creature running on reserves it had never had to draw on before, and he rolled onto his back in the dust because he didn't have the strength left to do anything else, and he watched the hunter come up over him, foreclaws raised, tongue hanging, 4 eyes glazed with a heat sickness Dale recognized because his own body was singing the same song. Draveth didn't strike. It stood over him, claws raised, breath rasping out of it in long, ragged pulls, and it simply stopped, swayed. Its own legs, Dale realized through the fog of his own pain, were trembling, overheated muscle twitching under ochre plating, its internal engine finally cooking from the inside the way his uncle always said it would, if you just made it run hot long enough. Slowly, with what looked like real effort, Draveth folded its forelimbs and lowered itself onto the rock beside him, not an attack posture, a collapse. Its head came down level with Dale's, four eyes half-lidded, exposing the soft, unarmored underside of its throat in a way that even Dale, delirious and half-cooked himself, understood instinctively as something significant. Something that, in whatever language this creature's body spoke, meant I yield, or maybe I understand you now, or maybe just I cannot go on and you can, and there is nothing more honest than that. They lay there together in the dust, hunter and hunted, both of them breathing like bellows, while the orange sun crawled with agonizing slowness toward whatever counted as evening on this god-forsaken rock. Dale didn't know how long he'd been unconscious when the shimmer door opened at the mouth of the long corridor and figures came through at a run, actual alien running, which he hadn't seen before. None of that patient, unhurried gait. He surfaced into awareness on a stretcher, Voskferai's four-eyed face hovering over him with an expression he still couldn't read, but that had lost every trace of the clinical boredom from their first conversation. 12 hours and 4 minutes, Voskferai said. You survived 12 hours and 4 minutes. Told you, Dale rasped through a throat that felt lined with sandpaper. Attitude, only thing I had left. Draveth is alive, Voskferai said, and something in the way it said the name made Dale think that mattered to it personally beyond the professional stakes. Heat trauma, significant but survivable with treatment. It will recover. A pause. It did not kill you when it had the opportunity. This is being noted. It was tired, Dale said. I get it. I was tired too. You do not understand. Indeed, Voskferai said, and for the first time its voice lost some of the clipped formality, dropped into something quieter. A tracker-class Kethari has never yielded a hunt while capable of movement, not once in the recorded history of the Corps. Draveth chose not to strike you. That is not exhaustion. That is a decision. Dale didn't have the strength to answer that. He let his eyes close and let them carry him wherever they were carrying him, and for the first time since he'd woken up strapped to that cold table, he let himself believe, just a little, that Emma's laugh might not be a memory he only got to keep. He woke again in a room that didn't smell like antiseptic and copper, smelled instead of nothing much at all, clean in a way that felt deliberate. His ribs were bound in something that hummed faintly and had already, impossibly, stopped hurting. His hip was wrapped. Someone had cleaned the gash on his shoulder blade and closed it with a line of small silver clips instead of stitches. Threlnu was in the room when he came fully around, standing near the door with its arms folded, plating dark and unreadable, and for a long moment neither of them said anything. The trial outcome stands, Threlnu said finally, and there was something in its voice that hadn't been there before, not warmth, not yet, but something adjacent to it. Reassessment. Surgeon Voskferai's protocol revision is authorized. Full study of human physiological adaptation, priority classification. The disposal schedule for the remaining specimens is suspended pending review. 11,000 people, Dale said. His voice came out steadier than he expected. That's what you're telling me. 11,000 people get to keep breathing because I ran around in the desert with a giant lizard dog for half a day. You did considerably more than run, Threlnu said, and Dale thought, though he genuinely couldn't be sure, reading a face built from 4 unmatched eyes and slate-colored plating, that there was the ghost of something like respect in it now. You forced a tracker-class hunter to yield without a single blow struck by your own hand. That has not happened before. Draveth requested from its own recovery bed that this be entered into the formal record with its endorsement attached. Big of him, Dale said. Tell him I said thanks for not eating me. I will relay a translated approximation of that sentiment, Threlnu said. with what Dale would have sworn on a human face was the beginning of dry amusement. It should have ended there. It didn't. 3 days into his recovery, 3 days of actual sleep, actual food, actual water that didn't come rationed to the ounce. The compound's alarms went off for the first time since Dale had arrived, a sound like every klaxon he'd ever heard layered on top of itself, and Voskferai came for him at a run that had none of its usual measured composure. "There is a complication," it said, hauling him upright by the arm with a strength that reminded Dale, uncomfortably, of exactly how far outmatched he was in every physical category that mattered. Threlnew's authorization of the Human Study Protocol has triggered a review by the Compact Oversight Council. A rival faction, one that profits from the disposal contracts, from harvesting your species as raw biological material rather than studying it, has moved against the station. Their enforcement vessel is inbound. If they arrive before the protocol revision is formally ratified, they will override it. Every specimen here, all 11,000, reverts to disposal status, including you. "How long?" Dale said, already moving, already reaching for boots that weren't quite his boots but fit close enough. 90 of your minutes, Voskferai said, perhaps less. 90 minutes was not enough time to save 11,000 people through any means Dale could imagine involving strength, and he'd stopped, somewhere in the long corridor, being the kind of man who reached for strength as an answer to anything. What he reached for instead, sprinting down a corridor with 2 Cathari surgeons half again his height struggling to match his suddenly desperate pace, was the layout of the compound he'd absorbed almost unconsciously over 4 days of captivity. Every duct, every access panel, every place his mechanic's eye had automatically cataloged the way it cataloged anything mechanical, out of habit, out of the same compulsion that made him notice a bad bearing squeal 3 rooms away. "The holding block's cooling system," Dale said, breathless, thinking out loud the way he used to when a problem was too big to hold quietly in his head. "It runs off the same primary loop as the station's docking clamps, doesn't it? I saw the conduit routing when they marched me through, same color coding, same junction housing." "That is correct," Voskferai said, 4 eyes swiveling toward him with something like alarm at the direction this was going. "You cannot mean to. The enforcement vessel's gonna dock, right? Standard procedure, matching the station's clamp specs. It is a compact registered vessel. It must dock through standard clamps to be recognized as a lawful enforcement action rather than an act of war." "Then I need access to that junction housing," Dale said, "in about 4 minutes and something I can use as a wrench." What he did in the end wasn't complicated in the way violence is complicated. It was complicated the way a bad thermostat is complicated. A chain of cause and effect that only looks like magic if you don't understand the plumbing. The station's docking clamps ran hydraulic pressure off the same coolant loop that kept the holding block's refrigeration units from cooking 11,000 prisoners in the heat their own bodies generated packed that close together. Dale had noticed, 4 days earlier, being marched past it half-conscious, that the whole system ran through a single pressure relief junction that any competent engineer would have redundant looped a decade ago, and that the Cathari, in their arrogant confidence that nothing on this station could ever threaten it, apparently hadn't bothered to. He cracked the junction housing with a salvaged support strut, working with hands still raw from the long corridor, ribs screaming under their brace every time he leaned into the leverage, while Voskferai stood watch and translated the increasingly panicked chatter coming over the compound's comm system as the enforcement vessel closed. And when the vessel came in for its dock, 7 minutes later, right on schedule, arrogant and unhurried the way everything Cathari seemed to move, its clamps engaged against a pressure line that Dale had bled off to nearly nothing, and the clamps, built to lawful spec, built for a station that could actually hold the pressure they expected, failed to seat. The vessel's automated systems, reading an unsafe docking condition, aborted the approach hard, throwing the ship into an emergency lateral burn that scraped its hull along the station's outer ring loud enough that Dale felt it through the floor 3 levels down. It wasn't destroyed. It wasn't meant to be. It was delayed, forced into a standoff, forced to hail the station for manual docking authorization, forced to wait for a human response that never had to come from strength, only from 12 minutes bought at exactly the right moment. 12 minutes was enough. The protocol revision cleared formal ratification with 4 minutes to spare. By the time the enforcement vessel's captain got anyone from the Compact Oversight Council on a live channel to complain about sabotage, there was nothing left to override. The disposal order was void, on the record, permanent. Dale sat on the floor of the junction access corridor afterward, back against a bulkhead, hands shaking with an adrenaline crash so complete it felt like the floor was tilting, and Voskferai lowered itself down beside him with none of its usual formal posture, 4 eyes tired in a way Dale had learned, over these strange days, to actually read. "You could have been killed accessing that junction," Voskferai said. "The pressure differential alone." "Yeah, well," Dale said. "Didn't have a wrench big enough to fight a warship, had a screwdriver and a bad attitude instead. Worked out." Voskferai's head tilted. "I do not understand the reference to a screwdriver." "Don't worry about it, Doc." Down the corridor, distant, Dale could hear something that might have been cheering. In whatever register 11,000 relieved prisoners of a dozen species made noise. He thought about Emma. He thought, with a tired, aching, entirely unglamorous certainty, that he was starving, and that his hip hurt like hell, and that whatever came next he was owed, genuinely, cosmically owed, the biggest plate of food the station could produce. "So," he said, "does surviving an interstellar hostage crisis come with hazard pay out here, or is that strictly an Earth thing?" Voskferai looked at him for a long moment with all 4 eyes, and made a sound Dale hadn't heard from it before, low, rough, unmistakably a laugh, whatever else it was. "I will file the inquiry," it said, "with the appropriate department." "You do that," Dale said, and closed his eyes and let himself finally rest. If a story like this one taught you anything today, drop a comment below and tell us what you think Dravith's first words to Dale would be once the translator implants finally worked both ways. And if you want more stories where humanity wins with grit instead of muscle, hit subscribe, like the video, and share it with someone who still thinks the underdog never gets to walk away standing.